Hello everyone, today I'm bringing you guys along with for a new custom Ghillie Loadout DIY guide that I'm going to be doing for my entire loadout, including my gun, accessories, and any of my gear that I wear. And today I'm going to be focusing on my VSR-10 concealment gun wrap that I'll have on my VSR-10. And this is not really like a tutorial based video, this is kind of just me walking through what I did to customize my concealment wrap. To start things off, I'm going to let you guys know what I used for this project, and the two main things I used were the KMCS concealment wrap, which I used for the main base layer, and the KMCS Kicking Mustang leaves, which I used to add on to the wrap itself. So the next material that I ended up using was these leaves made by Solotron Airsoft, and he's another company that sells custom leaves dyed and painted, and you can check him out on his Instagram or his YouTube channel, Solotron Airsoft, for these specific leaves. These are the brown and light brown leaves that I ended up buying from him. And another material that I did end up using for my last crafting series that I've made, I ended up using the raffia, which was the same exact material that I used from the last video that I used for crafting. Another item that I ended up using for this project was a product called Vanish Camo Tape, and this is a material made by Realtree, and it came in handy for patching certain areas that didn't have camo already. And to place all the materials together, I used micro cable ties, and I found a really good price on Amazon for 12 bucks for 1,000 piece. So I'll link that in the description so you can buy those yourselves. And one of the last things I ended up needing was a pair of scissors to cut the cable ties. So one of the first things I did to start my gun wrap for my VSR-10, I wanted to make sure the KMCS concealment wrap was at least going to cover the majority of my rifle. So I laid my rifle on top of the concealment wrap, making sure the stock lined up with one end and covering most of the barrel, so that I could use the camo tape to cover any pieces of the gun that would not have the concealment wrap. And then I folded over the concealment wrap on top of the rifle, and then folded back the end that was access that I wasn't going to need. So I just cut the rest of that piece off, and from there I was able to have the right sizing that I was going to need to make the cutouts for the scope and selfie cam mount, and for my Allen key holder as well. So once I had the excess concealment wrap, I just set that to the side. Another thing that I did to make the concealment wrap fitted to my rifle was I cut that little end piece off of the end of the KMCS concealment wrap. At this point, you've made the basic cuts needed to start the concealment wrap. Now all you got to do is make the cutouts for the scope and any other accessories that you have on your rifle. So start out by covering the gun of choice that you pick for your wrap and put that on top of your rifle. Then you're going to want to take your scissors and cut a slot on the top of the wrap for where your scope is going to be mounted, and cut a slot about half the size of your scope, and then just from there, once you have it cut, just slide it right over your scope so that it fits perfectly over your rifle in the area where your scope would be. After I cut out the slots for the scope, I then went to downsize the KMCS wrap so that it would fit the rifle a little bit better. While doing that, I left the elastic loops on the wrap that was going to be on the rifle so that I could tie natural veg and any other materials that I wanted to add later on. Once I finished cutting off the last portion of the suit, I set the remaining pieces aside for anything else I decided to craft later on, and then I grabbed the micro cable ties to tie the wrap to the barrel, but it wasn't the right size zip tie, so I then grabbed a much longer zip tie, like the 7-inch zip tie, and used that. So with the first zip tie, I ended up using the zip tie on the end portion of the stock that's on the front of the rifle, and it leads to the barrel, so I zipped the tie right at the end of the barrel that's at the end of the stock, and I use the zip ties instead of like adhesive or any or like shoe or anything like that, so that I could also remove the concealment wrap at any time I wanted. If I wasn't running my ghillie suit for the day, I could just take the concealment wrap off later on and use no wrap at all. And after that, I went ahead and cut out the slots for the selfie cam and the adapter that I have for my Allen key. Now I'm going to move on to the portion where I crafted the KMCS concealment wrap. One thing I do want to note is that this wrap really doesn't need much crafting or any crafting at all. It can be used standing alone by itself without any leaves or raffia, but in this case I did end up adding those materials to my concealment wrap, and to do that I first started with the raffia and I cut 2 holes in the wrap itself so that I could loop the raffia through those 2 holes, so then I could knot the raffia together. And you could also knot it twice, but in this case I just did once. But after that I did cut the raffia down to size, and this is the outcome of that. Now that I put on a decent amount of raffia, I broke out the zip ties so that I could start applying the leaves to the KMCS concealment wrap. From there I used the zip tie that I have now and I looped it through the holes that are already provided with the KMCS wrap, and I looped it through. From there I grabbed the Solitron leaves and used the hole that was in between the 2 leaves already, which is perfect for these micro cable ties because it fits right into that slot. And after I looped the zip tie through there, I tied it together and cut the remaining piece of the zip tie. And I did cut one of the leaves off trying to cut that end piece, but I just went back and kept going through each of the leaves that I wanted to add to the KMCS concealment wrap that I was going to make, and I just kept adding the leaves as I went along. And this is what the leaves look like when the leaf is applied to the suit and once it's completely finished. And now I'll show you what it will look like when you add 4 leaves to the suit in a kind of a square pattern with 1 leaf on top and 2 on the sides and 1 leaf on bottom. And these are the 4 leaves combined together with 1 zip tie, and in my opinion that's the best look for this wrap. The last thing I'm going to do to finish crafting my concealment wrap is I broke out the KMCS leaves, and I'm going to now apply them to the wrap. And I wanted to do this in a way where it wasn't the same pattern and like leaf shape as the leaves that are already on the suit. So I kind of like bundled up the leaf to kind of crinkle up, and then use the zip tie and tie the leaf as is, so it kind of looks like a different shape than all the other leaves that are on the wrap already. And this is the finished look of when I was done adding the materials. Now that the rifle wrap is pretty much done, the only thing left to do is fit the concealment wrap to the rifle. And by doing that, I started out by looping the slot for the scope through the wrap and left it hanging underneath the bolt handle, and then I went to the other parts like the Allen key holder and the selfie cam and looped those through the wrap. And then I went to tie the end of the concealment wrap to the barrel of the gun. By doing that, I used the 7-inch zip tie and used that to seal the end of the concealment wrap. The next part I ended up doing is grabbing one of the rubber bands, and before I did that I made sure the rubber band wasn't too tight for the rifle, but it needs to be really snug to the back of the stock so that holds the concealment wrap in place and so it doesn't move around on you when you're moving around the rifle. And to do that, I just looped the rubber band all the way from the start of the barrel all the way to the back of the stock, and I made sure that the sling wasn't attached beforehand, so I detached the sling and then wrapped that rubber band on. And the next part I started on was the zip tie that goes on the front end of the stock, which attaches to the barrel so that the wrap is super tight to the end of the barrel, and the last rubber band I attached to the hand grip where your hand goes to pull the trigger, and right in between the little indentation in that little portion of the hand grip, I slotted in the rubber band to that part of the rifle. So to finish off this little guide, I used the cloth tape that I got from Realtree, which funny enough ended up being the same tape that I used for my No Ridge Ghillie suit series. That it didn't really work out too well, and I didn't really like the coloring of the tape, but this cloth tape ended up being a perfect color and a perfect shading that I wanted, and it ended up blending really well with the KMCS concealment wrap, and it ended up looking very nice on the rifle in all the areas where it didn't have any concealment at all, where it was just black, plain color. So I used the cloth tape in those areas like the muzzle, and as you can see in this part of the clip, I used it for the scope as well. Before I go ahead and end the guide, guys, I'm going to show you another little tip that I found really helpful, and that was using the cloth tape to hold down the wrap to the rifle. And I just kind of crinkled up a little piece of the cloth tape and stuck it underneath the wrap that was near the end of the bolt handle, and right there I just kind of pressed it down, and I was able to slide the bolt back easier. That's going to be about it for today's custom Ghillie Loadout DIY guide that I have for my concealment wrap for my VSR10. But if you want to stay updated for more videos on this guide, definitely subscribe to the channel for all the future videos on this particular guide on different customizations that I have for my Ghillie Loadout. And hopefully you got some helpful tips on today's video, and I'll see you guys on the next one.